Water and Waste Management Committee, as well as you have throughout the other committees today. We're going to be quick. We got a little bit to discuss, but it's extremely important. So we're going to be very responsible in how we address and go through that. So, Madam Attorney, do we have a quorum?
We do.
We have a quorum, so our business will be official, so we're glad to do that. First thing I'm required to do, I think, and the call to order is to read the statutes as it would relate to conflicts of interest, so I'll do that. General Statute 138A-15 mandates that the chair inquire as to whether any member knows of any known or conflict of interest or appearance of conflict with respect to the matters before the Environmental Management Commission, Groundwater and Waste Management Committee. If there's any member knows of a conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict of interest, please state so at this time. Having heard none, I think we're free to go forward. Our first order of business today is to address the minutes. Can we get a motion to approve the minutes?
So move.
Can we get a second to approve the minutes?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the minutes? Having heard no discussion, can we take a vote? All in favor of adopting the minutes as written, please say aye, and those that disagree will be like sign. Those in favor of adopting the minutes, please say aye. Okay. Any opposed, like sign. Okay, Madam Attorney, I believe they have passed, so we will do that there. We do have one action item on our agenda today, but before we do, Tim, or Commissioner Baumgartner, I'd like for you to share some comments if you would.
Yeah, I just want to say I appreciate the department working with this committee and getting comments addressed in between the time that we've met in July. Just to reiterate where we've been so far for those out in the audience and especially the media that has been interested in this. Prior to the July 2024 Groundwater Committee, DEQ had only provided this committee with a summary. We received a written regulatory impact analysis as of the last meeting, which was in July. On May 8, 2024, DEQ had requested that this be an action item. Because there was not a regulatory impact analysis, we did not make it an action item. And several weeks after the May meeting, we did receive the regulatory impact analysis. We moved that to action item in July and had good discussion then. And I believe it was July 19th. July 10th was the meeting, committee meeting. July 19th, this committee provided some extra comments beyond the meeting to make sure we could move this forward and keep this process moving. And here we are in September with a revised RIA accordance to the motion that was on the table at the last meeting. So, Mr. Chair, just want to share that timeline so that everybody knows where we've been and where we are now.
Thank you, Commissioner Baumgartner. I think, Michael, Director Scott, we do have one action item. I think it will be a presentation as well, and it's a request to request approval to proceed to the EMC with the request for public notice and hearing for the proposed rule amendment to 15A NCAC 02L period 0202 groundwater quality standards and physical and regulatory impact analysis. And I think, Director Scott, you have a presentation for us. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bridget Shelton with Division of Water Resources and Jessica Monty with the Division of Waste Management will be delivering the presentation this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Director Scott.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Bridget Shelton, Groundwater Standards Coordinator with the Division of Water Resources, here today to present on 15A NCAC 02L 0202, the Groundwater Quality Standards PFAS rulemaking. So here's an outline for today. I'll be covering the first two bullets here, background on groundwater quality standards, as well as topic of today, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. These slides have been shown a few times before, so I plan to go through them quite quickly. Please let me know if you want me to slow down or have any questions. So the groundwater quality standards rule is 15A NCAC 02L. 0202 specifically, the groundwater quality standards, those are what we are proposing amendments to. This includes all the groundwater quality standards as well as the development process for how those standards are developed. Here is information on the groundwater quality standards. So these standards protect the groundwaters of the state as a resource for human consumption. It is an important resource in our state as groundwater supports about 50% of drinking water use in North Carolina. Also highlighting here that while groundwater standards are a state program, they are used in federal programs such as RCRA and Superfund. So these programs in the state do rely on these groundwater standards. So as we've covered before, there are two places in the rule where the practical quantitation limit, or the PQL, is mentioned. It's defined here at the bottom. It's an analytical term. It can also be known as the reporting limit. So the rule states that substances that do not have a groundwater standard, which is the case for all PFAS compounds at this moment, shall not be permitted in concentrations at or above the PQL. That's the first point there. And then the second point is when a standard for a substance is less than the PQL, the detection of that substance at or above the PQL constitutes a violation. So this is when there is an established health-based standard, but it is lower than the PQL value. So the PQL value would then be used as the compliance level for that substance. Also want to note here that PQL values, since it is a laboratory value, they can change regularly. Laboratory capabilities are constantly developing, and PQL values can vary across different labs as well based on their capabilities, and it can vary over time. So the rule states, has a process for how we develop these standards. So quickly going to go over this. The rule lays out first that we find the lowest of these values or criteria listed here. That includes the non-cancer concentration that protects for cancer, as well as the federal maximum contaminant level. Those values require toxicity values in order to calculate them. The rule also states which references we can look at to find those toxicity values in order of preference listed here. So as you can see, we do rely heavily on EPA assessments, as those assessments have been developed through intensive scientific review. So moving on to the topic of today, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS. They're a group of manufactured chemicals that are used to make fluoropolymer coatings and products. They're chemicals of specific concern, due in part to their significant presence in North Carolina and their ability to move throughout and persist in the environment, and their ability to bioaccumulate and build up in people, animals, and the environment over time. So for this rulemaking, DEQ has evaluated the available scientific data to develop groundwater standards for a subset of PFAS compounds. So information items were given to both the full commission and this committee over the last couple of years to prepare for this rulemaking. In May 2024, we presented an information item on the proposed groundwater standards and an overview of the regulatory impact analysis. Following this, at the July meeting, an action item was presented on these proposed PFAS groundwater standards and the associated RIA. So here were the compounds initially proposed by DEQ for the groundwater standards development. There were 8 PFAS with their acronyms listed here. The asterisks indicate which compounds are regulated by EPA's National Primary Drinking Water Regulation. So we proposed these 8 PFAS for rulemaking because these compounds have been detected in North Carolina, and the scientific data available shows that they can cause health effects. There's also toxicity data available for these compounds to derive the standards, and that data has been evaluated by a federal agency, with those assessments being finalized and published within the last few years. So at the July committee meeting, DEQ presented the proposed rule amendment and certified RIA for those 8 PFAS shown in the previous slide and listed here. The committee voted to have DEQ revise the rulemaking package to address 3 of those PFAS. So that was PFOA, PFOS, and HFPO dimer acid, or Gen X, and then return to the committee with the agenda item as revised. DEQ has revised the proposed rule and the RIA accordingly. The RIA was resent to OSBM for approval, and approval was received on August 14th, 2024.
Bridget, can I stop you a minute?
Mhm.
So in your first bullet, the 5 compounds that this committee chose not to move forward with at that meeting were all proposed to be regulated above PQL.
We were proposing health-based standards. That's correct, and that was above PQL. Mhm.
Okay. As in raising the standard for the compound.
Raising the existing limit. The standard is a calculated health base.
I just want to be clear because that was some confusion.
So just to be, by raising that standard, if had we chose to do that, would allow more of those chemical compounds to be in the water.
That's right.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so here are the,
Just now that you said that, and we chose not to go down that path.
right.
Thank you.
Here is the summarized information for the proposed groundwater standard for those three PFAS. This is the same information that was presented in the July meeting, so these values are the same. We included the references used for the development of the standards, the toxicity benchmarks and values available for each compound, and then the proposed groundwater standard is to the right here in units of nanograms per liter or parts per trillion. So there are multiple toxicity benchmarks and values available for these three compounds. So as a reminder, the bolded value there are the ones that we used for the basis of the proposed standards, as these led to the lowest value in order to be the most protective of human health in accordance with the rule. Here's a bit more context on those proposed standards. So again, the left-hand column has the proposed groundwater standards health-based calculated values. Again, same number presented in the July meeting. The middle column here shows the existing limit under the current O2L rule. So when there is no health-based groundwater standard for a substance, which is currently the case for any PFAS, including the 5, the O2L rule states that that substance is not allowed in the groundwater at or above the PQL. So as a reminder, PQL values can vary across labs and change over time. So the ones we have listed here are for reference. These were reported by EPA in their 1633 method. And then the right-hand column here shows the compliance level under the proposed rule. So for PFOS and PFOA, you can see that those calculated health-based values are quite low. They're lower than the reported PQL, or what can be reliably detected. So the O2L rule does have language that accounts for this, shown on the right here. So when a standard for a substance is less than that PQL, the detection of that substance at or above the PQL constitutes a violation. So for PFOS and PFOA, this PQL language does apply. So the compliance level for those two would be the PQL, although that proposed O2L health-based standard number would be written in the rule. The compliance level would be the PQL. For Gen X, the compliance level, as shown on the right-hand column, would be the O2L health-based calculated standard.
Bridget, I know I'm slowing you down and I asked not to, but I just want to reiterate. So that rule gives DWM the authority, or DWR, DEQ, the authority to regulate these compounds right now at PQL.
Yes, that's correct.
So this only changes the standard one way or the other. You have regulatory authority to regulate at PQL for all these compounds.
That don't have a standard. Okay, so I'll pass this off to Jessica Monti for a summary of the RIA.
Thank you, Bruce.
Good afternoon, Jessica Monti, Environmental Program Consultant with the Division of Waste Management. So as requested in the prior meeting, we revised the regulatory impact analysis to include only PFOA, PFOS, and Gen X. We also revised the RIA for clarification in response to multiple questions and comments we received, as Vice Chair Baumgartner mentioned after the last meeting. We also made changes to the table showing landfill, comparison of landfill data, to add data that we had received since the prior meeting, just to update that table with the data that we had. And we revised the amounts for the cost savings in those two tables mentioned there to remove the third treatment option that is a combination of GAC and ion exchange, as that option wouldn't apply to the benefit scenario because it's recommended for high concentrations of PFOA and PFOS. And if they had high concentrations, then they would not be part of that scenario where they would get benefits. So you might have noticed that the upper limit of the benefits in that final table were a little lower. That's the reason. So 5 of the 6 previously proposed standards that were higher than the regulatory limit at the PQL were removed from the analysis. Since we're still collecting PFAS data, the potential for future cost savings resulting from that higher standard proposed for Gen X, we can't rule that out, that there's still this potential for benefits at one site. If one site met that criteria that we listed in the RIA for potential future cost savings, that could still be a substantial economic impact and therefore makes it worth still mentioning, even if the chances of it might be lower that they would have those benefits. So overall, there's no change to the overall conclusion of from the prior RIA to the current RIA for the 3 compounds. And as Bridget mentioned, we took the revised RIA, sent it back to OSBM, and they approved it with the changes. And we also included in Attachment C a summary of the questions that we received after the last meeting with our responses, some of which were just providing a response in that document, or we made the clarification changes in the IRA, but that is also noted in that Attachment C. And I will hand it back to Bridget.
So here's the proposed timeline for rulemaking. So as mentioned, we presented information items in the past. In July, we presented an action item where the committee made the decision to revise the RIA to include only 3 of the compounds and return to the committee. So we're here today to ask approval to move to the EMC, to ask approval to go to public comment and public hearings. Just of note, there was a request from the EMC chair to have this item on the September EMC agenda. So the timeline shown here might get pushed up by a few months. So if approved by the EMC, the comment period would follow, and we would then come back to the EMC in 2025 to ask for approval of the final RIA and the adoption of the rule, which would put us on track for a proposed effective date in mid-2025.
Yes.
Proceed point of order. I think the recommendation needs to be something different than the decision to approve the rule text. I think we typically say approval to move it to EMC. So I was going to check that. I had that written down somewhere, but I lost it in all the stuff. But I don't believe we're approving rule text here. Rule text to go to.
The action item on the agenda is request approval to proceed to the EMC with request of public notice.
So remove, approve.
The slide is written different than what the action item
yes.
on the.
That's right.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so the action item request, approval to proceed to the EMC with request for public notice and hearings for the proposed rule amendment to 15A NCAC 02L 0202 groundwater quality standards and the associated fiscal and regulatory impact analysis.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Is there any questions for? Yes, Commissioner Lyon.
Thanks for the presentation. I just had one question because I was on the WebEx, but wasn't able to ask questions at the last meeting. But just a snapshot of the decision to exclude the other compounds. What was the specific reason that were excluded?
Yeah, and others will feel free to weigh in. But when we looked at what was being proposed, obviously the PFOA and PFOS, we know the long compounds and likely carcinogens that EPA has described them as. There's no question about potential impact of those compounds. We know that the citizens of North Carolina have struggled, especially around Chemours, with Gen X. What we saw the department asking for, which was highlighted in the previous slide and even in the last slide, is what the department was proposing was allowing more of these other compounds in the water than is currently regulated at the PQL. So it was the decision of the committee to continue to allow, to regulate the 3 that you've seen here at these limits that's been identified, but allow the department to continue to regulate the other 5 at the lesser levels, which is outlined by the PQL. What we didn't want to do was raise the amount of these compounds that could be in the water for the citizens of North Carolina.
Right.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Yes.
I'm not on the committee. Could I just ask a question? Something in her presentation caught my ear, and I made me wonder just how that was going to work. It has to do with the PQL and using the PQL as the limiting value. But when you're talking about the values could differ from lab to lab, and that sort of hit me, and I thought, well, wait a minute, then how do you decide which PQL you're going to use if they're differing values from different labs?
I might defer to Director Scott for the implementation side.
Yeah, so we're going to review the data based on, oftentimes this groundwater data is collected by consultants and obviously through a certified lab, right? You know, a registered environmental consultant or certified professional engineer or licensed geologist, and then using a certified lab. So we're going to look at the quantitation limits that lab has. I will tell you, we share feedback when we see quantitation limits, to your point, PQLs that are too high. We will share that feedback, but we will look at that PQL reference or quantitation value the associated lab is using. So it is dependent on the lab that's being used. That's part of our messaging here is with the establishment of standards, there's certainty that number doesn't vary because a PQL could go down over time.
Oh, yeah, sure. I
So
understand
today
that.
we may be talking 2 part per trillion or 4 part per trillion. in 12 months, we could be talking 1.5. And our lab is at 1.5, our contract lab 1.5 or 2. So those are some of the nuances of PQL. But to your point, you could see a different baseline depending on what a consultant or permittee uses as their lab. But if we see a PQL that's 10 or 20 part per trillion, just as an example, we're going to flag that and share that feedback with the consultant and the associated lab, because that would be an example much higher than what we typically see.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions for our presenters? Haven't seen none. There is a motion on the floor. If she will bring that back up. Thank you very much, Bridget. I'll entertain a motion if there is one.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve to proceed to the EMC with the request for public notice and hearing for the proposed rule amendment for 15A NCAC 2L 0202 groundwater quality standards and the physical and regulatory impact analysis.
Fantastic. Do we have a motion on the floor? Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Commissioner Yarborough, second. Having a motion and a second, is there any discussion at this time? Having seen no discussion, I will entertain a vote. All those in favor of the motion as outlined, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say like sign. Ms. Council, I think the motion carries unanimously, at least as I see it. So, fantastic. So, Director Scott, we have some future committee meetings. You'd like to outline where we are with that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We don't have anything specifically on the full commission agenda tomorrow from the Groundwater and Wastewater Management Committee. For future committee meetings, we're expecting in November to hear on the periodic rule review, 15A NCAC 02L, 02N, 020, and 02P. And there's also an interim maximum allowable concentration upcoming agenda item proposed for November also. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Director Scott, there is on the agenda comments from the director, and we'll go into that if you have comments, please.
Yes, I'll be brief. I know that Director Rogers has a few follow-up comments to conclude us this afternoon, Mr. Chairman. But once again, I'd like to thank this committee for their work on this important subject, meaning O2L and PFAS. And definitely thank you to all the colleagues, Water Resources and Waste Management for their collective work on this rule package, the associated RIA, and the stakeholders also who have provided input on this subject. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I do want to update you on one event that has happened. On July 22nd, I received a letter requesting IMAC for PFAS and PFOA, the 8 contaminants or 8 parameters that were being considered by the committee. The staff has reviewed that information. All the information that was required under rule was present. It's been reviewed. We sent this out to public notice on September 4th, and we intend to implement the IMAC beginning in October 15th. So just wanted to give you all that information. We are required after it is actually implemented to notice the commission within 30 days, and we will do that as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Rogers. Before we close it out, Chairman Solomon, you have some comments you'd like to share with the committee and those in attendance here today?
Probably 3 things. One, you guys heard I did add this onto the EMC agenda tomorrow for 30-day waiver. I want to make sure that everything in the RA had been changed and the chair and vice chair were happy with the document, but I did want to notice it time for everybody to see it so you could take action. So if you've got a hesitation of taking action tomorrow, please tell me in between before we vote for a 30-day waiver. But my intention will be tomorrow is to do the 30-day waiver and approve the package y'all just approved and get this out of public comment. It's 45 days prior. That's all the notes requirements. I do want, Director Scott, I want to thank you. Well, last month, you guys have made some changes like we asked you to, and basically gave us an RA that I thought a lot of good alternatives and truth, and you came back and revised, and that is much appreciated from you and your staff. And then I'd like to also thank the whole committee, but I'd really like to thank the chair and vice chair. You guys took some hits. I think we all know what I'm talking about. but you kept your mouth shut. You didn't get into some narratives out there. And you waited till you had the information you could move on. When we got the information, you moved on it. So I thank y'all for your efforts and your willingness to take some of the hits you took, but unfairly. But you still have to, we have a job to do, and I appreciate y'all doing your job.
Thank you, Chairman Solomon. We really do appreciate those comments. There's been a lot of dialogue around the work of this committee. What I hope the takeaway is that we worked in a very pragmatic way with DEQ. We gave questions during the time to get them in their hands that we had on what needs to be in the RRA. They responded in a very timely way. It's why we're here today. We appreciate the chairman very much willing to offer that waiver tomorrow so that we can get this out, get it out for public comment as quickly as possible. We think the final decision of this committee is right on target with being able to regulate the 2 legacy compounds at the standards that we've outlined here and being able to identify a standard for Gen X. This state has struggled mightily with Gen X as it would relate to Chemours in that area and even down in the Wilmington area. And I know all of us have received hundreds of letters and emails, and that's fine. That's what we're here for, as public servants. But I want it to be clearly understood when we got the information, we reacted to that information, we passed this action item today, and we plan tomorrow to waive the 30-day notice to get this to public comment. So I want to thank all the committee members, Vice Chair Baumgardner, and DEQ for your resilience and your timely and hard work. And if there's nothing else, I'd like to, is there any other comments? If not, I'd like to call this committee meeting adjourned. Thank you.